Okay. So there may be one more lecture on file system once we complete IO. Okay, so this is very simple. Okay, very simple presentation content, and we'll finish it fast, and then we'll start IO. Okay, so basically we have learned about file system, both buffered IO, that is in case we have library, and then library within that library can buffer the data that comes from user, because if we do system call, then every system call requires significant amount of time. So even to write say 10 letters, or um, which a program may do, okay, then we'll have to do 10 system calls in case we are using system calls directly. However, if you are using library, we can bring a block of data or multiple blocks of data, buffer it locally, and do read write operation into that, and periodically put the data back into the hard disk. Okay, so we have seen these two types of IO operations. Okay, and we have seen library helps us because system calls in general have large number of arguments. Okay, so so when you use library function, these are kind of tailored. So good number of library functions are available which you can use whatever you like, but overall the structure is simpler. Okay, then we have seen the concept of opening a file. Now if when we file is considered as an array of bytes. Okay, so we can visualize file as a sequence of bytes, a linear sequence of bytes, and then we have a concept of file pointer. Okay, this is a position in the file. Okay, so if we read a file, and when we open a file, it's at the beginning, and once we keep reading on, this pointer keeps moving. We can also, whatever be the position, we can always put a position, this pointer at a particular position that we say seek using seek operation. Okay, and seek we have seen can be done with respect to the starting position or ending position or the current position. So there are three ways to reach to the place where you want to. Okay, okay, then we have seen the concept of file descriptor. Okay, and it is different from the stream that we get when we use library. So this is when we use library, buffered library, when we say do buffered IO. And then we can also, as a user, open a file. Okay, then in that case we'll get FD, or file descriptor. So we can use either method depending on what you really want to do, but most of the people prefer to use library because library is ported also across multiple OS. So if you want to write a program that uses a library, and internally it could be any OS, so your program doesn't have to bother about system call specifically for the particular OS in which you are executing program. Okay, so if you are so library, the same library can be ported onto different OS by different using different mechanisms, right? Or its code may be some slightly different, or maybe uh, too much different, but it doesn't matter to user because interfaces are the same. So there's a great advantage of using library because the program kind of becomes OS independent. Okay, so all these concepts we have seen, right? Okay, okay, all right. So basically, when we have open file descriptor, it tells us about the where is the file data in the disk, because at user level we are using only file descriptors. Okay. Okay, and it in turn has got to point out to something that's in case of Unix is inode, which tells us where the actual data is kept inside blocks. What are those blocks where data is kept in a disk? Okay, and then the current position in the file. Okay, when you're doing a read operation, then there is a pointer, file pointer, which is specified. All right, so these are two things that we get out of file description. Okay, all right, so file description directly doesn't point to does not give data about where blocks are kept in hard disk, but it gives a pointer to other you know so for example inode in case of Unix or Linux. Okay, so that's all we have studied so far. Okay, today we'll briefly look at use of file descriptors, a very interesting way of using file descriptors, right? Possibly you have done programming on that. Okay, so another 10 minutes we'll finish this, and then we'll start IO chapter on IO. So this is a process. Okay, all right. Process may have multiple threads. Let's assume that has just one thread. Okay, so and then okay, uh, so now we can see there are user space as well as kernel space. Okay, so we have address space corresponding to the process, and of course they are in CPU, there are registers. Okay, and then in kernel space we'll keep file descriptors. Okay, so file descriptor although is available to user, but information about file descriptor, because file descriptor describes the file in certain way. Okay, and we have seen this data structure. So in case of Linux, right? So this file descriptor information is kept in kernel space. Okay, and of course it will point to file descriptor that we get as part of when we open a file is a number. Okay, integer number, and then however it has got to point to something that describes the file. So now let's assume that we are opening a file called foo.txt, and as a result of that we get a file descriptor 3. Okay, so here is okay, so file description will tell us about the name of the file and the position where the where the file pointer is. Okay, or file position is. Okay, all right, so what we get now is the file descriptor is 3. Okay, and this points to a file description. Okay, which essentially right now we are assuming that there's only two data items, name of the file and the position of the file, where what is the current position. All right, any question? Is it okay? Okay, all right. Now, of course, when we start a process, with that there are already 3 files associated, right? 0, 1 and 2. Of course, we are not considering now in this example, which corresponds to standard in, standard out, std out, and standard error, std error. All right. So we are not here there will be descriptor 0, 1, 2 also, but we are not right now doing considering that. Okay. Now let's now when we execute this instruction read, now this is a file descriptor 3, which is from the file which is pointed out by this file descriptor, uh, 100 bytes into a buffer. Okay, that we are is shown as buff, right? It can be a pointer to buffer or whatever. Okay, now as when we execute this, what will be the position here? Anyone?
100.
Good, it will be 100. Okay, all right. Now when we close this, what will happen? Everything will go away, right? Simple, but the file exists. We are just closing the file. Okay, now let's again consider. Now let's fork this. Now this process, let's fork. Okay, so what will happen as a part of forking? What happens to files?
Two process will be there which are opening the same file.
Yeah, so basically the child process will also have a file descriptor which will have same value, which is it will have file descriptor which is 3. Okay, so this is it, and it will point to the same file description. Okay, so this is how forking is done. Now let's so file descriptor is copied. File descriptor is copied into this this processors where file descriptors are kept. Okay, uh, and but file description is alias. Basically, we just point because both are the same and will point to the same description. Right? All right. So this okay. So this is it. Now, so file description is alias. There's a point mentioned here. Now let's do another operation. Read process 1 does read 3 into buffer another 100 bytes. Okay. So as a result of that, the position 100 bytes are read, and now position changes to 200. Now if this does the operation, note that this is alias, right? So same file position will be visible to both processes, which is the same. Okay, so now if we do read 3, process 2 does read 3 buff 100. As a result of that, file position changes to 300. Okay, all right. So now if this now does close 3, process 1 closes, so this is simply removed, but file descriptor in another process remains. All right, so
Sir, I have a question. Sir,
yeah,
will the position will change for both the processes?
that's right, because descriptor is the same now. See, number is same, so both we have seen, right? In case of Linux, file descriptor just is a index to a table, right?
Yes, sir.
Both are indexing to same table, which is file description table, and then data there is the same. So basically, it's aliasing in some sense. So both can change the file pointers.
Sir,
Okay.
but when we fork, sir, both will have separate PID. So, sir, the file descriptor will be in other PIDs, na?
So yeah, so how does it matter? PID is okay. You mean to say is that file descriptor for
It's a
each
copy.
process?
It's a copy. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, for both of them, it basically when they say aliasing, essentially it's pointing out to the same place. Yeah.
So, sir, like if I am doing some operation, it's like it's reading and it's right. So both are reading. Sir, will it like alternate if like the context which is happening?
Yes. So you have to then you have to when you write a process like that and fork it and both are doing reading, you have to program it appropriately. Otherwise, it will not make sense. So when writing is also done, both can write, right? File descriptor again has to be managed properly. So, but it is a tool, right? If you want, you can use it,
Okay, sir.
right? So it's a left to it gives a very powerful way of interaction. The two process and other process. If it may not be child process, it could be any other process which if one shares a file descriptor, anybody can use that file descriptor. Okay. Now the question you may ask is that is the file descriptor then has to be unique, right, across processes. Otherwise, how will this can be done? Okay, just think about it and Google little bit, right? Is it really needed to be unique across the system. For example, inode has to be unique.
Yes, sir.
Okay, but pointer to inode cannot be. Maybe one inode is being used by.
2 or 3 pointers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
So
hard-
so there are multiple ways is possible. But just think about it. Okay. All right. So aliasing, why aliasing a file description is a good idea? Resource sharing becomes simpler between processes. The file sharing in particular. Okay, so in Linux, file is very important because all the devices that we are going to read, look into now, or any system that uses devices, the interface for that is same as that of a file. So we can use the same system calls, for reading, writing, etc. that we have been doing for disk, also for other devices, right? Now, not exactly, for example, Seek has, very unique. Seek does what? Seek changes the file position or file pointer. Okay, maybe that many devices may not use Seek, but it will, but many operations that are available to user are applicable to many devices. Okay, so we can have identical interface for file on disk, devices like terminal, printer, mouse, etc. Regular files on disk, and also sockets, right? Networking socket, right? Right, the word socket is interesting. Did you think about it? Why it is called socket? Socket programming, when you do, right? It's like your electrical socket, on wall. Okay, here whatever you put comes out at other place. Of course, electricity doesn't work that way, but
like you can plug anything. Just
yes,
it has to be the same interface.
yes. So here also in networking we have concept of, I mean, this other end of socket can be anywhere in the same computer or elsewhere. Okay, and also we can do using same interface inter-process communication like pipes and sockets again. And these are typical system calls that we can use, like open, read, write, close, even for devices. Now these devices are viewed, or basically treated as a file. Okay, so now let's look at this. For example, we have a terminal emulator. So there are file descriptor for that is 0, 1, 2, which corresponds to, we have seen just now, right? These are 3 standard input, output, and error. Okay, so when we so now we have file descriptor 0, 1, 2, similarly 0, 1, 2 here, and all of these point to terminal emulator. Okay, and then when we now we can delete, or if required, we can also add descriptors, right? For example, 0, if this process closes, 0, then this file descriptor is removed. Okay, and so on. Okay, similarly, if we have seen the concept of DUP and DUP2, okay, so we can duplicate the file descriptor. Okay, so here is the case. Suppose this is a process as we have seen earlier, and then it has done this operation like foo, open foo text. As a result, file descriptor 3 has come out. So this 3 is here, and this is open file description. And then we have done read 3 buff 100. So file position is 100. So position, this descriptor will have position value equal to 100. Okay. Now we can, when we execute dup3, okay, it means we are duplicating file descriptor, and now the next descriptor is 4. Okay, it's shown here. Okay, so when we execute this, the result is 4. So now we have created a new file descriptor. The OS gives this descriptor number automatically, which is the next higher integer number. And if you use dup2, then you have to specify what file descriptor number a process wants, right? So if suppose we execute dup2 3, duplicate 3 as a name, the number of descriptor has go to 162. So 162. So there's one more descriptor that has come in. Now this can be manipulated. All right. I mean, you can write a program where you can use multiple file descriptors, and then these descriptors, then of course file position can be different depending on the operation different processes are doing. So the process is doing on different file descriptors. Okay, all right. Okay, so that's all about the file system. Again, remember that we will look at how files are actually organized into hard disk little later after few classes. Okay, so there are of course many pitfalls of what we are doing. For example, when we fork a process that has multiple threads, okay, that's not really a good way of doing programming, right? Okay, don't do it unless you want to do exec in the child process. So these are many things you will find out in book, that how thread programming should be done and what is the impact of that. All right. All right. So if you fork a multi-threaded process, then child process always have a single thread. A thread, and the child process will have just one thread, and that will be copy of the thread that has run the fork. Okay, all other threads will vanish from the child process. In parent process, they remain. All right. So it's shown here. All right. Fork, when we do fork in multi-threaded process, okay, file descriptor is copied. Okay, that's it, I guess. Okay. All right. So that's all about file. Okay, go through this program, right? So it's very simple program about file opening and doing put operation and so on. Right. So, and the result also I've shown. So it's very simple. All right. So let's now move on to IO. Just give me a minute. Let me just change the presentation. Give me a minute. Okay. Okay. All right. Can you see the presentation now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's come to the next topic, which is input output. And all these we have done earlier in, course on computer architecture. So it's just a revision. Okay. All right. So we look at these concepts: IO concept, buses, IO instruction, which is memory mapped, and then different ways of interaction like polling and interrupt driven IO and DMA. All this we have done. Just want to revise it before moving to next topic. Okay, so we know that from computer architecture course that a computer has 5 important components, right? And we have looked at the model also for that, right? Von Neumann model. And the important part is data path that we have studied, ALU, primary ALU we can say. Okay, then how how we control, how we execute an instruction, such which requires movement of data across various parts, also manipulation of data, right? Okay, for example, addition, in order to add, data has got to come to registers and come from register, and after result data has again go back to register, and so on, right? So control part, data path, memory. Without RAM we cannot have execution, right? Because RAM is very much important. And then two important things are input and output. Okay, and this picture also we have seen. So computer system has memory, data path, control, input and output. All right. And then this diagram also we have looked at it. Okay, so here we have processor, then memory, then something that's shown as red line is as a protection boundary. Basically user mode and kernel mode in some sense, right? So anything that is here, which includes storage and various IO, have got to be protected. It has got to, so this is a protection boundary. So who does this protection? Is done by OS. Who brings OS into picture? Basically a processor using a bit, right? Okay, mode bit. So when we are in protected mode, okay, when the system is in protected mode, only then IO operations can be done. All right, is it clear? So you can always argue that if OS is not running in CPU, then of course it is a user program running, right? And we have seen that in order for OS to run, processor has to do the context switching such that OS starts running, right? And this is done by the processor at, very important part of processor is setting this, mode bit. Okay, and this mode bit, can be set by processor when there is an interrupt or illegal instruction execution or IO or syscall or whatever. Okay, so then only number of ways OS comes into picture. And then we have seen one important way is when there is periodic interrupt from the clock, okay, such that after every few, what do you call that, time ticks, depending on what is this quantum available to process, OS comes into play. Okay, so this is very important. And then we have seen that memory, there is a data transfer that can happen between storage, for example disk, and main memory. Okay, and then of course between memory and various components, various devices. Of course, I mean, this disk is also a device, like there can be network card or floppy drive or display. Okay, and then we have seen that why IO is so complex, because IO has to handle devices that works at various speeds, right? And then speed could be many, maybe a million times more. Okay, so for example, this is half nanosecond, where is it? This is 150 million nanosecond. Okay, while keystroke is 100 millisecond. So you note that L1 cache reference word says even how much time is required to do, required to read a keystroke, right? Basically keystroke works at very slow space. Okay, so now OS has to handle all these time scales. Okay, and then we have seen this diagram, okay, wherein we have this processor, and we try to optimize processor in such a great way that reading from memory is almost at the clock speed, and we do it very intelligently with the use of L1 and L2 caches, right, that we have seen here. Registers, of course, is the fastest memory that a processor has. And the next is L1 cache, then L2 cache, and size also goes up. Okay, and then we have common L3 cache. So each core has L1, and in most of the architecture, you will find that processor, each core has common L1, L2 cache, and also it has registers like the structure here, and common L3. And across the core there is L3 cache. Okay, and these work at very fast speed, right? And then of course we have RAM, which is primarily DRAM memory. Okay, and then next level of hierarchy we have SSD, which is faster than secondary memory and more expensive. We'll look at this in brief. And then we have secondary storage. Okay, so all this transformation is done in such a way that overall access time is less. Okay, so that's the reason we create this memory hierarchy that we have studied, right? Bottom is disk, then SSD, then maybe some other new technologies. Okay, then we will have RAM, which is SDRAM. Then we have caches, L3, L2, L1, and at the top we have registers. And we've seen as we go down, the capacity goes up. At the same time, access time also goes up. What operating time to read goes up, right? Okay, and as we go up, the reverse of that, capacity goes down, speed goes up. All right, and the whole, all this is managed so beautifully by memory management methods, and usually done by OS with the help of hardware, such that overall access time is less. That we have studied in great detail, right? Okay. And then we have IO devices are supported by IO controllers. Okay, that we have seen. We'll look at this again. So each device, whatever be the device, okay, has a controller. So hard disk has a controller, flash drive also has a controller. Okay, printer has a controller. Okay, mouse will have a controller built into that. So controllers are part of the device. Okay. Anything else? For example, your something that's directly connected to the system. All these IO devices have got to have controller. LAN card will have controller. Okay, your terminal will have a controller. Okay, the screen, your screen, laptop screen will also have a controller. So remember that each device comes with a controller, and these controllers have registers. Okay, we have seen those registers: status register, input register, okay, and output register. So we'll look at these three types of registers. Okay, one where data can come, sorry, not input output, one where data can come, one where command can come, and third is corresponding to status. Now each device will have these registers. Okay, and these registers can be accessed. So you can write onto a command to that, read status whether this device is busy or doing operation and so on. Okay, and data can be read out. Okay, or written into. So these are basically all I'm trying to point out is each device comes with the registers. Okay, for the operation. So each device has a controller, and controller has registers. Okay, and this is a typical architecture. Okay, which we have studied earlier also, right? So we have here CPU or processor. Okay, and then we have basically a PCI bus. It's kind of old bus, right? Is not now. Of course, we have next generation PCI buses, and then this PCI bus is connected to SCSI bus. Okay, now SCSI bus is needed for fast synchronous operations like writing onto reading and writing from drive and so on. Okay, and then we have you know, other slow buses, like one is shown here as expansion bus, where you know, we can have devices which are slow, like keyboard or mouse can be connected, or even printer can be connected. Okay, and then we will have disk controller here, and which can be connected to PCI bus, and this PCI bus can also connect to network interface cards. Now they, depending on the computer architecture, on as new computers are coming, this bus organization is also changing. This is not so modern. Okay, however, most of PC you will have you know, some version of PCI bus. Okay, all right, but most high-end servers etc. will have different architecture. So buses we have seen. So there is a difference between bus and switch. Okay, when we say bus, it has number of wires, okay, corresponding to data and control. Okay, and when we say bus in general, let's treat this as a single bus, not having let's not treat this as having multiple. Now this bus, when it's shared across number of user, then there has got to be a protocol to handle that, right? For suppose P1 or device 1 is talking to device 2, at this point in time when this transfer is happening, no other device should do the transfer, like as we have seen in case of Ethernet. Okay, plain shared Ethernet, thick Ethernet, for example. So there has got to be a protocol. Okay, for these different devices to operate on, right? So that device can use this bus. So bus is basically a shared medium. Okay, when we think of bus, right? Now when bus becomes switch, as we have seen in case of Ethernet, right, then this is a basically a switch, right? Say for example a crossbar switch, right, where is P1, P2, P3, P4, where we can have this kind of configuration, right? P1 connected to P3, P2 to P4, or we can have a configuration like this. P1 is connected to P4, P2 is connected to P3. Okay, all these combinations are possible in a fully a switch, which is we call sometimes a crossbar switch. Okay, so most new generation computers have switches. We don't have buses because buses are very flexible. Is also these are slow in nature because only two devices at a time can communicate. Now if we want parallel communication among multiple devices, then of course we need switches. As number of ports are increasing and so on, you know, there's a need for parallel communication. Okay, non-blocking communication that we call, because you know here when D1 is communicating to D3, the communication between D2 and D4 is blocked, right? So it's a kind of blocking. Okay, all right. So we have seen the buses architecture as follows, right? We have, in general, we have system bus. Now system bus is very fast bus, which is connected between CPU and memory, RAM, and this transfer happens at very fast speed. So system bus has got to be very fast. And then from system bus, we use bridge to connect it to PCI bus. Okay, and to which PCI bus we can connect various devices like, you know, printer or CD drive or disk or something else. There is also, we have seen in computer architecture, of course, there are various ways we can use these buses, right? There can be hierarchy of buses. Okay, you know, there can be buses of slower speed, which will connect, you know, devices like mouse and printer and so on, which operate at slow speed. And then there has got to be some devices which are connected to USB port, there is a bus called USB bus, which is not shown here. Okay, so various combinations are possible. And then, as we said, that this PCI, which is basically here a shared bus, okay, among number of devices. Okay, now it's changing. The next version of this is a switch. It's called PCI Express bus, which is nothing but a switch, right? Now on this, we can have parallel connection, parallel data transfer between various devices. Okay, all right. And can also connect to slower buses, like for example USB or something like that. Okay, all right. All right, so this is similar to switched Ethernet. All right.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sir, you mentioned that device-to-device communication. So, sir, this device-to-device communication bypasses the CPU.
No, totally depends on your architecture.
Sir, that means that the devices should have some kind of like CPU built in them to communicate.
Yeah,
with
every
them.
device has a CPU.
Every device.
Every device will have got to have a CPU that you can connect to you.
Like sir, new direct storage is coming, so that
Yeah.
graphics card can directly contact to NVMe storage.
Yeah, direct. So I don't know at this point in time what scenarios. So you look at this diagram and you can think of scenarios, right? So for example, so there is of course CPUs will come into play somewhere or other. Because some program that's in execution has to control that. Okay, like in case of DMA, but many these transfers can happen without full notice of the
CPU.
processor, right? Yeah. So many there's a when we have large number of devices, so many things can happen. But only thing to note here, as I understand, is that this is kind of non-blocking. Now we'll have to look at various scenarios in which devices can transfer the data. For example, we may have to, there are two Ethernets. Okay, so there is a one node here that's connected to Ethernet card that we shown Ethernet 1. Okay, that has to communicate to Ethernet 2. The communication is happening between two devices connected with two different interfaces. Of course, there will be some use of processor, right, to initiate the operation and so on and so forth, right? But now if this switch can provide this direct communication when actual data transfer is happening, that's the possibility in this kind of architecture, not in this kind of architecture, right? Because if the multiple such cards are there, then or there's common bus, then this will be shared. Okay, so now you'll have to, not necessarily every device can talk to every device and so on. They see, when we say that data is to be transferred between two devices, it has got to be, there must be a program that's running. Okay, where is that program running?
On the system.
It will be in one of the processors.
Yeah.
Okay. However, that doesn't mean that each device cannot have each device may also be running a program corresponding to that device. Okay, because device is not a mechanical device, right? It has a computer built into it, which runs a program to control operations of the device. Okay, and there is a concept of controller with each device, and that controller will get commands from somewhere. Ultimately, all this is done to with with control of some process or on behalf of some process. That process has got to communicate to in some way to controller to start these operations. That's it. Okay, how it is done, etc. That these are the details. Okay, so so not necessarily all the time all devices can communicate in parallel, but they significant part of transfer can happen in parallel where there is no direct intervention of CPU or processor. So that's the point. Okay, otherwise if there are multiple devices, like as we see in case of buses connected to each other, only two can communicate at a time. And also we can see that, you know, sending, usually this, if these buses have unidirectional wires buses, then either transfer can happen only in one direction, not both directions. So if we have this kind of switches, then many such things can be taken care of. All right, so there are various kind of buses. We have seen memory bus or system bus, which is very fast. Okay, then general IO bus like PCI bus. Okay, then we have peripheral buses, which are like, you know, SCSI or SATA or USB. USB is also is a bus. Okay, SATA is used. SATA and SCSI both are used for hard disk. Okay, generally these are to connect slow devices, which includes disk, mouse, and keyboards. Okay, in general we have hierarchy of buses of different speeds and very intelligently interconnected, such that the bus to which slow devices are connected, like keyboard and mouse, etc., when, you know, the transfer is happening, it will not block faster devices doing its own interaction. Okay, all right, so that's the reason we have multiple layers of multiple number of buses. All right.
For the, by means of USB is a bus, like, sir, I have like 5 devices connected to USB.
Yeah,
And, only one is communicating at a time.
not necessary. You can have USB extensions also, right?
So, sir,
USB
can,
is a bus. So in USB, in your laptop, for example, only one USB port is there. Okay, it has given you one port, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a cable or extender from USB port, and then you have a device where there are multiple USB ports, right? And to the one you can connect printer, to other you can connect mouse, third you can have you know, memory stick, and so on. The USB in general is a bus. Okay, what we see USB as a port, right, in most of the devices, most of the laptops. So in general, you have multiple USB ports also in most laptops now. Okay, USB is a bus basically. Okay, so it means that when it's a bus, it must have a protocol.
sir, like if I have like 4 USB ports in my computer, so sir, there will be 4 USB bus.
Depends on, it totally depends on the architecture.
Okay.
Totally depends on the architecture, how interconnections are done. Okay, like the diagram here, I don't know whether it's shown here, but you can look at internal diagram for any laptop. You'll come to know whether they are part of the same bus or different buses. Could be any. It totally depends on how interconnection between buses happen. Okay, it's not shown here. All right. So another 5 minutes. So we have, in general, communication between CPU and IO devices happen through a device controller. Now this device controller is part of the device. Okay, in most of the cases, not everywhere, but in general, device comes with a device controller built into it. Okay, there can be also external controllers. Okay, so now let's look at this simple diagram. We have CPU and then memory, which is connected through processor memory bus, kind of system bus. Okay, and then there is a device, which is a terminal or display. Okay, and then something is to be displayed, data is to be displayed. Okay, and that data will come into, let's assume, this part. Okay, now this is part of the memory, okay, which is reserved only for the display. Okay, all right, and then we have various registers, as we have seen. Like we have control register where we can give commands, then status register, and then corresponding to the reading and writing, and control could be for some other operations, right? Okay, so this is the structure. So in general we have registers. Now question is that how processor is going to access these registers. Okay, once this register is accessed, then life is simple, then device can do whatever is required to do. Okay, so there are two ways of handling this. First is through IO instructions. I mean, there are very special instructions in your instruction set, very special machine instructions corresponding to IO. Okay, okay, so that's one way. And through these operations, we can write into these registers and also into, somehow we can write data into this buffer. Second is that memory mapped IO, where these registers are part of the address space, processes address space. What does it mean? Then directly, if we do normal operations, read, write, and give address corresponding to these registers, then reading, writing, etc. can be done. So IO can be accomplished through load and store instructions. Okay, provided these registers are part of the address space. All right. So most of the computers nowadays use memory mapped IO. All right. So let's take one example here, memory mapped IO. So this is a address space. Okay, and hardware maps control register and display into address space. Okay, and then we can define, for example, some address, for example, between 8 whatever here 8000 F000 to this one for a specific purpose, right? Okay, where is it? For display memory. Wow, where is that? Okay. Okay, so it's kind of okay. So display memory is, of course, and a different number is given here, but display memory. So these addresses can be mapped to display memory. Okay. All right. So where whatever data is to be written, or whatever image is to be rendered or displayed, corresponding data will come to this memory, and this is also part of the address space. Then the process can then write this data here in this memory. All right. Okay, similarly the command and status registers are also memory mapped. All right, so now let's look at oh, you have a class at 4 o'clock.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a class?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's stop and let's start from this point onwards tomorrow. Basically this nothing but same thing that we have seen, that there in general we can say there are different registers, and then we'll look at these three methods including DMA in next class tomorrow. All right. Okay. All right. Thank you.